Well, hello, hello, hello. I am so glad you are here. You're listening to Sunrise After Midnight. I am Deborah Hamm, your host. Today's title is When Grief Affects Your Identity. When Grief Affects Your Identity. We are going to discuss what it feels like if it closed before you were ready for it to close. Not to say that you ever will. It's not always about losing someone. Grief is not always about losing someone. That is absolutely a form of grief. It is real, it is heavy, and this show has been speaking to that every week. But grief is bigger than that. Grief is the response to any significant, say, one of the lost, a veteran coming home from service and finding that the person who left is not quite the person who came back. Leaving a role that gave your days a shape, gave your days a purpose. That, like loss. And in some cases, it can feel like a great deal of loss. It's similar to a loss of direction, a loss of purpose, a loss of knowing exactly who you were, associated with grief, real grief. Dr. Kenneth J. Doka, who was the senior consultant with the Hospice Foundation of America, actually called this disenfranchised grief. It's when you retire and feel new and come with the association. When you think about identity grief is what you feel from the inside. You may not be to that point where you even know what it is exactly. You don't have a name for what you're feeling right now. You just know that something's off. Something is off. You're not sad about a certain thing. You're sad about yourself. You feel lost. You feel like you have no direction. The version of you that used to show up, the one who knew what they were doing and why. Maybe you stopped recognizing yourself, not your face, not your life, but it was just that missing, explaining what happened. This is a normal routine for you. Hypothetically, you lose the job for whatever the reason. You wake up getting ready to go to work, but there's no job for you to go to. Well, when you lose a loved one, you're unaccustomed to doing certain things as well on a daily. Maybe you wake up and get ready for work together. Maybe you fix coffee or they fix a role of a person. And one of the things that you look at when you're dealing with that is, I want you to know this part, is that you can grieve who you used to be and still move forward. You can grieve who you used to be, but still move forward in who you are becoming. Who you are becoming. Those two things do not cancel each other out. They live in the same season. Now, I grieve as a wife. That's a season that I have to go through. It's almost like a back and forth. I will put it this way. In 1999, two grief researchers named Margaret Strobe and Henk, Henk, Shook, with emotional place. We know that, but they researched it. They said they shift back and forth between two different kinds of experience. That's what their research brought up. Well, I'm going to say this. I know for a fact that does happen because I went through that. But this is called loss orientation, and the other is called restoration orientation. So, thing that you included, it was just, is where you face the loss directly. This is where the tears come. In some cases, the silence come, and some numbness come. In some cases, even the anger comes. This is loss orientation. It's where you miss. This is loss orientation. It's where you miss who you were. It's where you feel the weight of what's in front of you, of the future that you plan longer. There's a change, there's a shift, there's a drastic change. And for some people, identity grief and loss orientation looks like scrolling past old pictures, and feeling looks like scrolling past old pictures and feeling the distance. Places you go search loss orientation and not being sure what you're going to do today. Not and remember, I'm talking about a loss here. And I am dealing with whatever the loss or whatever the significant loss in your life was at that time is happening to you right now. And for some people, it does not look like tears at all. It looks like going quiet. It looks like just keeping busy. It looks like letting your hands do something while your heart does its work underneath. In other words, you go to work while your heart does its work underneath. In other words, you go to work. But you're on that job physically, you're there. But mentally, you're not. Your heart is not even there, but you went to work. You see, grief does not look one specific way. It never has, and it never will. What life mean it? Life mean it. You mean that you're enjoying yourself. You're moving forward. Restoration orientation is not forgetting. It's not saying the loss does not matter. It is your mind and your body taking a breath. It's saying you're moving into your becoming. For some people, it doesn't take long for that to happen, the restoration process. For some, it takes longer. And we're going to go ahead and put this out here and say for some, it's kind of in between. Well, for me, it took years. Slow, not someone else's time. When you're in a identity grief, the restoration orientation may be a different responsibility, maybe a conversation that points ability, maybe a conversation that points in a direction you had not even thought about before now. Identity grief is what happens in loss orientation. Identity rebuild happens in loss restoration orientation as well as restoration orientation. And there's a shift. There's the back and forth between these two orientations. Choose when it happens. You don't choose it. You can be in a completely ordinary moment, feeling almost like yourself, and then a song comes on, or someone says a name, or you pass a place you used to belong to, and in 1 second, you are back in the full weight of loss orientation. That can happen. That is reality. That is not a setback. That is not a setback. That is the shift back. That is the shift moving in of who you love, moving the version of yourself, still moving. One of the things I want to say is this. Your old story. God does not waste our old story. We're going to cover a biblical anchor in today's episode, but What I want you to hold on to as we move into our biblical anchor today is this: everything you were before did not disappear. Everything you were before you start dealing with this midnight season, before you start dealing with this loss orientation or even the restoration orientation, everything that you dealt with is not a loss. It didn't disappear. You didn't disappear. You're still here. You're still here. And when you think about that, I want you to know everything about you, God uses the whole person. He uses the whole person. God was doing this long before research. God in his word already showed all these processes happening. The skills, the experience, the pain, the lessons, the discipline. God does not erase any of that from our life. He redirects it. He redirects it. You want me to repeat it again? I will repeat it again. He, as I don't know, in my, don't know, in my, in the full weight of my, in the full weight of my grief season or my midnight season. Yeah. Let's talk about Saul. Let's talk about Saul for a minute here. Saul on his road a minute here. Saul on his road to Damascus. I want you to turn to the book of Acts, the 9th chapter. Some of you listening may know about this story, but today I want you to